let's move on to the big episode, arguably could be described as the biggest episode of the season, potentially, which I would disagree with. I think bigger things are coming. But episode 2, Through the Valley. So you and I discussed this as well beforehand. We were like, when are they going to do it? Like, when is it going to happen? And I even said, if it happens in episode 1, I am here for it, because that would take some balls, but I'd be here for it.
Yeah.
I love everything they did with this episode. I think the way that it's like a slow build up to that moment and the sense of dread that we get is just, oh, and there's some criticisms online about this episode where some people are saying like, oh, there was a big infected fight in Jackson versus this moment with like Joel and then Dina and Abby, and it's like I wish they just focused on that. And I don't know, like I feel like it was played well. I feel like the threat that Jackson had was a completely different threat to what Joel was going through, and I like the kind of the mash and kind of the juxtaposition between them. Where this was such an isolated moment that was just as dangerous compared to this huge bombastic battle that was happening over here that obviously affected so many more people, but I liked the juxtaposition with that. I don't know how you felt about it.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
I think, the online feedback, I think there are just certain people who are just always wanting to complain. And I think that one of the biggest complaints were from season 1 from the public or from online trolls was that there weren't enough infected scenes. There weren't enough
Mm,
big, grandiose, like that scene we had in season 1 with the bloater. Like we didn't see a lot of that in season 1, and people were
right.
complaining about it. So maybe they listened and they tried to innovate the story in a way that allowed for those moments while still maintaining the core integrity of the show. And lo and behold, it's probably the same people complaining about this now. So
Hmm.
but taking it at face value for what it is, I think that one of the really fun things that we get when we adapt something from a game into a show is we're getting a different medium interpreting the story, and that medium offers a vantage point into certain qualities that we don't get in a more obviously three-dimensional, but I would say like thematically sometimes two-dimensional world that is a game, because it's just you playing the character interfacing with the world. And so the relationship of how you explore certain things and scenes is only subjective and respective to the character you're playing at that moment in time. And so
Mm.
with this, I found the exploration of more going on in the town to be kind of fun. I thought it was an interesting way to explore the world building. And in the game, they explore that the town was attacked by threats. So these are
Yeah.
things that we've heard about, but we haven't seen. So I think it was interesting for them to do that. I think this displaces Tommy. From my memory, Tommy doesn't stay in the town. I believe he goes with Joel,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
and he's with Joel when Joel stumbles upon Abby. So
Yeah.
it displaces Tommy inside the town, which then kind of changes the way the characters are dispersed. But I didn't mind it. I didn't mind it
Mm.
at all. I thought the contrast was really nice, and it was giving Game of Thrones the house down boots. Like it was like the White Walker battle. It was giving Battle of the
Yes.
Bastards, but it was also giving at the end of the episode we get a parallel to Game of Thrones in literally how it is accomplished.
Hmm.
It is like,
Listen, like
yeah,
if there's anything HBO can do well, it's a big battle sequence that looks like
yeah.
Game of Thrones. Am I right? But
Yes.
oh, like yes, I think Tommy's an interesting character to talk about briefly before we get into kind of Abby and the Joel of it all. Is that Tommy in the game is very different from this Tommy. Now, he's like
Mm.
a lot more of kind of like a redneck loose cannon from what I remember, like in the kind of first and then second game. But they've humanized him a lot more. In this, like they explore a lot more the relationship with Maria, which I really love, like their relationship together. But as well, they're building him a lot more as like this leader of the town, which is really interesting. So like, when we see him like talking to the townsfolk and like making the preparations for the battle and like even having jokes with them and stuff like that. And he is the one that is dictating, this is how it should be done. So he's like, stay away from the main area, like, which funnily enough is the first place he runs to later on. And like, he talks about like, making the preparations, like where everyone should be standing, like if they come through, run, don't be a martyr and all of this. And it's such interesting because in a parallel world, that would have been the role that Joel had.
Yeah.
And yet Joel is more the builder, he's like, he does woodwork, right? He like builds, he helps to build the foundations. He talks about keeping people out. Whereas Tommy here talks about keeping people safe, and he's not
Hmm.
focusing his attention on the one person, which arguably could be his wife and his child. He is talking about protecting this whole town. And I really love that. I really love this about Tommy as well. And even like, later on when he's the one that spots the bloater, which ends up breaking through the walls, Tommy's like, oh shit, this is horrendous because it's a bloody bloater that's come into the town. But he's the one that's like, nope, give me that flamethrower, let's go, and has that fight, which is interesting because the flamethrower isn't something till you get until way later in the game. But I like that episode too. We're like, yep, here's a flamethrower, let's go. And even just that, like he's the one that traces leads the bloater away, has that fight with it in the alleyway, and it looks like, oh shit, Tommy's in deep shit right now. And then it's like the last few fumes of the fuel that he's got, it does kill the bloater. But I like this version of Tommy. I like, as you said, Joey, like this isn't a direct adaptation. This is a different version of the same character in some ways. But I do like what they've done with him here, and I like him in this episode.
Yeah, I also think that when you're casting characters for a show or when you're writing a character for a show, there is typically going to be a bit more of a dynamic arc in how the character evolves. And so if a character begins in a place more similar to where he or she ends, it then kind of creates a lack of, I don't know, audience interest when you're watching
Hmm.
because it creates less of that emotional story. And I feel like I don't know where they're going to take Tommy's character, but I would predict that they're going to evolve his character into a different dynamic place based
Hmm.
on how they're picturing him now. And I think we're seeing that a lot with these characters. Like there's a particular way that they're establishing the character so that they can end in a place that's pretty dynamically different, which I think is one of those facets of this particular medium, television, movie, etc., that is a bit different than a game, where a game is more like
Mm.
caricaturistic as opposed to human. If we see a human be interpreted as a character, then it comes across as corny and not believable because
Hmm.
a game environment naturally has a suspension of disbelief because it's a game. And
Hmm.
so like even with like, not to like sway away from Tommy, but even, how Ellie's character, like we play Ellie and so we can kill anybody with Ellie, and so we naturally have this like suspension of disbelief that she can kill anything. So in the show there's, I think, a bit more of a softness that they're allowing her character to evolve more. And I think the
Mm.
same thing might be happening here with Tommy, where they're starting him in a place that's just a little dynamically different than the game so that it can pair better into the medium.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. That's an interesting way of exploring it because, as I said, like if it was a direct adaptation, these characters would be sidelined a lot more than what they are. And like although in the second
Oh
game
yeah.
there is like a form of like Tommy boss battle as well, which obviously it'll be interesting to see how they do that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They are taking the time in like this adaptation to really flesh out these characters and give them more purpose, give them more of like, as I said with like Dina, like she could easily have been that side character of just she's the love interest, but they are giving them so much more time to stand on their own 2 feet and make their own decisions. And again, we come back to that word, but it is so important because we're seeing how it affects and how it makes these characters grow and stand out away from our main heroes, which I really, really like. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just think I love what they've done with Tommy. I really like this version of the character, and I'm intrigued to see how that goes, going forward as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, just this whole, we'll get to the obviously the big moment, but like just this whole battle sequence. I mean, as you said, it was giving Game of Thrones. It
It was
was
Game of Thrones down.
100%. I mean, everything. Like, where was Brienne of Tarth taken
I
down? Like,
know
I was
that
waiting for her.
grunt.
Right, exactly.
Wrong
I was like,
show. That grunt was on season 2 of Severance.
like, listen, bring it in. But yeah, no, it was so wonderfully done. And like as we said, like if HBO have anything, they have a budget and they know how to do a big battle sequence. Like, and it was great. It was so well done. I love like the layers of it. I love like, the threat of the infected where like they're rolling the barrels down and burning them outside. And then like even the way that all of this is triggered when we talked earlier on about like the vines and like when they find that and like, it starts off where there is a member of Jackson who's like breaking down the pipes and like, you know, initially Abby obviously rolls down this hill and like discovers all of the frozen infected, and that's kind of what wakes them up and they start chasing her. But when this person in Jackson is like working on the pipes and accidentally hits the vines and is like, oh, what's going on? You notice all of the infected turn and then head toward Jackson. And I just think
Yeah.
that's such an interesting way to do that. But yeah, but I loved all of this from like them running up to the walls and like being burnt, and then like you see the bloater smash through and then they all break through, and it's just utter hell. And like all of these levels of like Maria doesn't look like she's safe. Tommy doesn't look like he's safe. We see a lot of people get annihilated. And then like, then when the dogs get released, when Maria released them later on and they just dive and pounce on them. Just I loved all of these levels. And as you said, it was giving Game of Thrones. We've seen this type of thing before, but I did love it for, you know, that counteraction of sees in episode one when we see this beautiful town, like the walls are set up, it feels really secure, everything feels really compounded. And it is that again that we talked about this in season one, just when you think you are safe, the rug can be pulled out from you at any point to remind you of the world that you actually live in. Because it's so easy to think of Jackson as this perfect little, metropolis of like, this is the world now, we can live here, like everything will be fine, we can ignore what's outside.
Yeah.
When the outside breaches and comes back in, it's that forever reminder of this is what the world is actually like. Don't forget it and don't get too safe.
Yeah, and there again to bring up this concept of mirroring, which I guess is going to be the title of this podcast episode at large. Um, I find that a lot of the interpersonal stories are microcosms for what's going on at large in the world, and so
Hmm.
you have this interpersonal threat, this kind of individualized threat that is people attacking certain individuals of the town, obviously Joel, and you have this macro world threat at the same time. And it's kind of this larger
Hmm.
metaphor of like the walls that were being forced up, that Joel was like, keep the walls up, keep the walls up. They officially are coming down. And
Hmm.
so there's this kind of like mirroring of that metaphor and iteration of that story in both a micro and a macro level.
Mm, yeah, that's a really good point as well. It is literally that, like the emotional walls that we see are being literally broken down versus the literal walls as well. Yeah, that's such a good point, actually, Joey. That is a very nice mirror to that.
Yeah.
Um, So, yeah, I mean, let's talk about the literally like for like moments from the game, which I absolutely loved, which we're going to talk about Abby here. So, obviously, Abby, we see her initially. She's set up at her like this beautiful like cabin, beautiful. It looks exactly the same from the game with like the big windows and everything, like out in the wilderness. Obviously, has that view of Jackson in the distance. She's got like her other Salt Lake crew with her. But like, I like this. I like that, we even see the little like interconnected conversations when like some of the other gang are talking and they're saying, okay, we're here, we know what she wants to do, but like we need to kind of talk her out of this to head back because this isn't fathomable. Like we can't do this, we can't just walk into this place and take out Joel. Like that wouldn't happen, we would all be murdered by them. So I like that even like the little conversations between them mirror that when they're like, no, actually we all know we're here. I'm going to try and convince her to come back home, and that'll be the end of it. But then all of this, like when she is in many ways what we know Ellie is going to become, which is so driven by this one thing, this need to get revenge. And it's already like a prelude of things to come, of like, we know that's how Ellie's going to get. Obviously, episode five, when we talk about that, very much becomes that. But yeah, I liked all of this when like, Abby is like, I'm gonna go. Like, if you guys want to stay, fuck you, I'm going. I like that she heads out with her gun, and then when she tumbles down the hill, like the gun's gone. She had it for like 5 seconds. And then, like, all of this running from the infected, getting to the compound, literally crawling behind the fence on the ground. Like, when you play the first game, this is how it starts. Like when you're playing, like, as Abby in this moment, and like you're crawling, like running from the infected, and all of this beautifully done. And I
Yeah.
love all of that. Like, just when it seems like she's going to get attacked, bang, we hear gunshot, hand into the camera, like Joel picking her up and saving her. And just, like all of this, beat for beat for beat. I loved it. I love the tension of this because it's almost like we know what's coming. We know that this is going to be the big moment in Jackson. But I loved all of this, just the recreation from the game. I just thought it was so well shot. And I just loved how they led up to that moment.
Yeah, I think that that is one of the scenes,
Yes.
the seared images
Yes.
of the fence. And I think that it's so impactful in the game. I'm definitely I am, somewhat well versed in games and gaming, but not like a gaming connoisseur as others. But I know Game of Thrones, not Game of Thrones. Oh, this episode might as well be.
I mean, you
Um,
do.
I do know Game of Thrones. I know The Last of Us is a, game quote unquote, but game changing game because it was so narratively driven. And I think that the first game establishes that like the narrative, the way that they create narration and intersperse story and game together is was arguably revolutionary at the time. Then you take it to the second, and it's the first time I remember cutscenes, which are the story,
Mm,
being seamlessly integrated into the action you take next. And it's one of the biggest components and takeaways that I had first playing the game still to this day. And it was
hmm
my first relationship with it. I don't know if they kind of set the bar for that. I don't know if they were the game that made that the standard of a cutscene to gameplay sequence. Anyway, this is the first time you really witness it, where you are Abby crawling underneath the snow or on the snow underneath the fence, and then you get up and it like immediately goes into cutscene and back and forth. It's just
yeah.
like this constant. This is one of the most vivid shifts in the game, so I think it's incredible they included it, and I think Abby's character in general is it's such an again, it's such a nice mirror because we're seeing how you explored. There are these little conversations happening around how they're like, this isn't a smart idea, let's go.
hmm
And how Abby makes it happen, right? And it's this idea of like the person who becomes like the son of that solar system where everyone revolves around them,
mm
their ravenous revenge arc pulls so much focus that it affects everyone around them, and it pulls everyone around them and indirectly makes the decisions for everyone around them when
mm.
they don't want that decision. We see that obviously with Ellie and Joel. Now we're seeing it with Abby, and I think we're going to see that more played out with Ellie and how her story of revenge kind of moves through the rest of the show.
Yeah, that's a
So
really good point. And I guess this is probably a good point to talk about the character of Abby because this is the big Abby moment, right? Like this is like, we talk about moments
yeah,
like of like big moments from the second game, controversial moments. Like this is the one, right? This is like the Abby moment. And of course, there are moments later on which, I'm going to be really interested to see what they do with Abby. Like, I'll say the line, "You are my people." You'll know what I'm talking about with that, Joey. And I'm intrigued to see what they do with that later on with characters like Lev. But I have to commend the actress, so Caitlin Dever, for like embodying Abby in the way that she does. I think I really like this actress. Now we can talk about like in the game for those that don't know, like Abby looks physically very different. She's a lot more like stacked. She's like
she's
hench. She's
brolic.
like she's like you don't want to take a punch from Abby because she'll knock your face all the way around. Like she's super strong. And like it plays into that physical. And I love that in the game they gave us a physical exploration of a type of female presenting character like that we don't get often in video games. So I appreciate the game for doing that. You felt like a badass, like when you played as Abby. Like she's literally punching the infected at points, which very much kind of counteracts with the way that Ellie plays in the game, who isn't like that, who has to like, rely on weapons a lot more. But so obviously we don't get that physicalization with this character. It is a little bit of a shame, I will admit it is a little bit missed for me, but I love what this actress does with this character. Genuinely. Like, I love that sense of like, because we know, as a mirror, we know that this is the road that Ellie's going to go down, and Abby's already here. She's like ahead of Ellie on the same road right now. She's the one, though, that's going to pave the way for Ellie to become this. And I really like that. So, the way this, Caitlin Dever, the way that she plays this, I think is beautiful. Like when she first, we see from episode one that, and we kind of do get too much explained, in my opinion, when she's like, I've got beef with this man, I need to take him out. Whereas the game did a lot more better, in my opinion, where it was this big mystery. Who is this character? What? She's taken out our protagonist from the first game? What is going on? Whereas this, we already know she's got beef. We see the flashback at the start of this episode when she's talking to herself in the corridor, saying, You don't want to go in that room because you're not ready for what's in there. Obviously, we find out that Joel murdered her father in that massive killing spree he did at the end of season one to save Ellie. So she absolutely has a right to get her revenge. Like she even says later on to Joel, like, I was, this age when that happened. What, like I was 19 or something when I lost him? And like, even when she says that to Joel, like, he can't even look her in the eye. Like, he looks away from her, and like all of this, like, I love that building of that anger and that's what fuels her determination of, I need to do this. I need to kill this man. So like all of this, like the unsurety of like when Joel saves her, and then they travel together, and she's like, even Joel at one point says, "Oh, we should probably head back because you can see the fire in Jackson in the distance." And she's like, "No, no, we should go to my campus nearby. Let's just go there and like wait till things cool down because we won't make it." Like all of this build up, and then oh, when we get the moment. So like I love this of like when you know you can tell, like even just watching, if you haven't played the game, the moment that Joel and Dina, which Joey said earlier on, it's actually Joel and Tommy in the game. But the moment that Joel and Dina go into that room, you know that things aren't right. The way that they're looking at him, when they find out his name is Joel, and the way that they all turn and look, like the tension is beautiful. And like, they grab Dina, they knock her out, like straight away, she's on the ground. And then like all of this, the way it builds up when we see her grab a gun and he's like, I saved your life. And then the way she spins around and just takes his leg out and he falls down. Again, beat for beat in the game, we see this.
Yeah.
But just all of this conversation between them, as I said, when like she says to Joel, like, I think she says, like, I was 19. And like the way he turns and looks away from her because he's like, that's not the narrative I've built up for what happened. In my mind, I saved someone.
Yeah.
I didn't kill your father. In my mind, I was a hero. And he can't, even in that moment, he finds that hard. And her getting this confession out of him to say the words, this is the things that Catherine O'Hara was trying to get out of him. And in this moment, when he's on the ground, nowhere else to go, he knows he's going to die at this point. He just says it. He confesses. And I love that he confesses, this is where I was when this happened. That's what she needed to hear. And even like she gets a little bit more of her speech out as well in this episode, which is nice because like earlier on in the game, like Joel cuts her off and says, like, if you're going to do something, just fucking do it. And I like that she gets a little bit more of this out, but just all of the building up to getting the golf club and it just, it was wonderfully acted by her. It really, really was. And I just think it landed the beats that it had to for the way it plays out in the game.
Yeah. I think she's amazing. I've seen her in a lot of stuff. What's her name
Hmm.
again?
Caitlin Devon.
Caitlin Denver.
Dever, Dever.
Dether.
Hmm.
Caitlin Dether. Okay.
Yeah.
Love her. Seen her in a bunch of stuff. She's fab. I'm very happy with the casting. I think that you need someone who can act. And I think
Hmm.
that's again to just speak on a lot of the contention that I see online. People are like, well, cosplayers can look just like characters. Cosplayers aren't actors, though.
Yeah.
And to act a role and to interpret a role requires this very specific, elevated skill set. And there might be actors who might be more appropriate physically for the part, but it doesn't mean that they are as appropriate in terms of the character development and the psychological understanding and the acting, the performance. And that is what's most important about the characters in this particular game and this particular show. It isn't their physicality, it's their performance, it's their emotion. And so I think she does a brilliant job. I think she's awesome. I totally agree with you on that. And I think the same way that we explored earlier, that like Dina is a little more effeminate, maybe, um, to create more of a to kind of masculinize, is that a
Hmm.
word? To
Yeah.
masculinize Ellie. I also think that like Bella Ramsey physically wouldn't look like a threat or wouldn't look like a potential I could go toe to toe with you if Abby was casted as someone who was or cast as someone who was like brolic.
Hmm.
She would come across like a monster. Um, and so maybe it would the suspension of disbelief that's present in the game isn't present in the human story, and so it creates more of a mirror between the two of them. And as you explored, like Ellie's going to be going down that path, and to even speak on that more, so I guess I missed. So Abby says she's 19 when it happens, right? Is that what you're
Hmm.
saying?
Hmm.
Okay, so isn't Ellie 19 at this moment in time?
Yeah. So that's an interesting through line
So
there.
the trauma begins, the
Hmm.
incident begins where the father figure is murdered at this age of 19. I would imagine that Joel looks away as well because he's like, "You are Ellie,"
Yes.
and I think there's this like, "Oh shit," but I also think there's this thematic narrative mirroring of Abby and Ellie because this is the seed is planted now.
Hmm.
But I thought the scene was gorgeous. I thought the scene was stunning. I thought the acting was incredible. Everybody from Bella Ramsey to Caitlin Dether. Is that what you said
Hmm.
her name is? Okay.
Dever, yeah.
And Pedro Pascal. I think all of it Chef's kiss, so freaking good. My only qualm, and I only say this because I understand why they did it this way, but my only qualm is that it's not in the basement as it is in the game.
Yeah.
And the only reason why is because I do think that there is an argument for the metaphoric through line of the basement imagery. And we
Hmm.
see the basement imagery coming in later in this season. And we also, I think there's just like a deeper metaphor for like what that basement symbolizes. And so
Hmm.
I personally like the basement location for where the murder happens. But
Hmm.
I recognize probably for budgeting and set purposes, they kind of just had this one set built, which was like a replica of what you see in the game. And so they just kept it all in that one spot for that reason.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Otherwise, great though. I mean, that's me nitpicking. That's me
Hmm.
like, splitting hairs. But gorge. And can you also, I don't know why I'm forgetting, when the finishing blow is done in the game, is it the golf club stick or is it a gun?
I I believe it is the golf club, but
It is. Okay.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it is the golf club.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I wasn't imagining that.
Mm,
And I was wondering if they did that, they changed it on purpose, which it sounds like they didn't change it, but if they
mm,
did change it, I was thinking maybe it was a more direct correlative to paying homage to Game of Thrones and how
mm,
Pedro Pascal's character in Game of Thrones, sorry, spoiler alert, everybody, close your ears, dies the same way, being stabbed in the back of the head. And
mm.
then you also have like obviously the scene we were talking about earlier with like how it mirrors a lot of like the White Walker attack on the wall. And then you also have this like storm brewing, which is kind of like the whole idea of Game of Thrones and like the deeper metaphor. So I actually think they were paying homage to Game of Thrones. And so I was wondering if they changed the killing on purpose to pay homage to it, but I
Mm.
could be misremembering that
Yeah.
completely.
No, I believe it is a stab, but like
Okay.
there are a few little differences in that. Like, I do love everything that is beat for beat. Like, like even her saying like you don't get to rush this and then hitting him in the
Mm.
leg with a golf club where she just shot him in the leg. And like all of that I think plays really well. The big difference here is that clearly it's Tommy and not Dina
Yep,
who's there, but obviously
for sure.
we do get that exploration in episode 3 when we find out what Dina did pick up from seeing these people. But like what I did like that they did change. So obviously like when we see, and as you said, Joey, like in the game when Ellie does come in, she starts up high up in the building and works her way down to the basement where it's happening. Whereas here, she kind of comes in lower and works her way up. And I guess like I don't know, maybe just lighting, whatever. But yeah, but I do like that because we do see Ellie now, like in the kind of the home that she shares with Joel and Jackson. She moved from the bedroom to the basement and made that her own space, which is an interesting exploration of what that means, as you said, which is beautifully done. But I do like the change that they made when, so the moment happens, like Ellie bursts in, she has a bit of a scrap, she slashes one of them on the face, she's pinned to the ground. Joel looks like very heavily beaten up. Like, his last thing that he sees in the world is Ellie, and he's kind of staring at her while he's on the ground, covered in blood. He's obviously been beaten by the golf club by Abby. And like she's the last thing that he looks at, and I really like that. That makes sense for his character before he goes out. Now in the game, after that happens, when she obviously stabs Joel in the head and he's dead, like Ellie is then knocked out. Whereas what I like here, what they didn't do is that obviously they pinned her down, but then they just leave her because they don't perceive her as a threat, and like clearly not. She's so emotional. Bella Ramsey's acting, OMG, beautifully played in this moment.
So
The
good.
way that Ellie crawls over to Joel and just lays with him, and their two heads on top of each other, stunning, stunning. Like that was such a nice addition because God, we needed that. Like we really did. Because as I said, like episode 1, they were so far apart, and then together in that moment when they do come together, it's in the worst possible way. Like physically they are together, but Joel's no longer with us, and it's almost like Ellie missed her chance to build that bridge again with Joel. It's like that was take another thing taken away from her. And that is almost like a little bit more of the fuel for the fire of I need to get revenge because you took this away from me. I wasn't ready for that thing to go yet. But it's just, oh, what a powerful moment. I'm so pleased that they didn't hold back with it. Joey and I talked extensively when we last saw each other in person. Like, are they going to do it that way? Are they going to go that way? Like, we were trying to fathom like how they were going to like work it out. I think they really sold this moment, and I'm pleased that they didn't, mute it. They didn't water it down. They gave you the shock value, and obviously the response online has been crazy, where people have been like, "Holy shit, that was intense." Yeah, that was the intent. That's how we felt playing the game way back years ago, and that's been that weird secret that we've been keeping from people for so long. But I'm pleased that they nailed it because that needs to happen for what happens next in Ellie's characterization.
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing to add. I think
Mm,
that it's just it was what it was. It is what
mm,
it is. I think the emotional impact of it is necessary. I did not see them altering that scene at all because it would completely
mhm,
change the whole show.
mm.
And so I'm so happy they kept it. Um, yeah, I think it was stunning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just it's a bit of everything, and like that's the good thing about this is like, we get this a lot of action, a lot of drama. There's a lot going on in Jackson, as we said, compared to this isolated moment where there's just tension rising, rising, rising. Like the tension over here is like a kettle that's boiled and has gone out of control. Whereas the tension over here is just keeps creeping up, creeping up, creeping up to the point of when all of that starts to happen, it's almost like you can't decide like what is worse, like what's happening in the town right now or what's happening to our beloved character right now that we've spent a whole season with, that we've played a whole game with. But yes, I just thought it was so well delivered, and I have to say the music that plays at the end. So, for anyone that doesn't know, the episode is called Through the Valley. The song that plays at the very end is called Through the Valley. It's a song by Sean James, but it's covered by Ashley Johnson, aka the voice of Ellie in the game. And if you pay attention to the lyrics in that, there's like a lyric when, she sings, but I know when I die, my soul is damned, and we get that when that's such an interesting thematic here. Like, my soul is damned because we know that Joel felt like that for a long time after what he did at the end of season one. Like, he is damned for that. He feels damned for that. Abby, in many ways, her soul is damned. She's been on this route, this cause of revenge. That's been her life for like the last 5 years, getting this revenge. Ellie's soul is going to go into damned territory for the journey that she's going to go on, the way that we see, in episode 5 with Nora, like the actions that we see, Ellie take at that point is so far removed from the Ellie that we have right now. So it's interesting that feeling of like, being damned, like my soul is damned. And again, there's so many kind of questions that brings up there of like what it means to try and be a good person in a world that is so cruel and what that looks like and how you can easily be turned. But I just thought again, Joey and I talked about this a lot in our coverage of season one with like the way that music is placed so beautifully. But this song, at the end of that, when we see like them riding off with their horses, Joel's body being dragged behind, it's just that was beautiful. That was cinema. That was
Yeah.
really, really well done.
I think there's also so much to be said and like how smart of a decision that is to include Ashley Johnson performing at this moment
Yes.
because one, season one, she plays Ellie's mom. And
Yes.
so we are seeing the kind of role of a parent and how trauma is inherited. Ellie's existence is that of the resilience of trauma, her mom being bitten at the point of or the moment of birth. And so Ellie's birthed into the world via trauma, and that's through the relationship with one parent. And now we're seeing the kind of new chapter of Ellie's life begin with the death of with the death of another, a father figure. And we also see that through Ellie. And then we see the
Mm,
opposite of that with Sarah dying in the first episode, where it's the parent losing the child. And so there's this constant play with parentage and this what's inherited and what is nature, what is nurture, going back to what Gail says that they're more alike than you realize, but there's this conversation of nurture as not just nature. And so I think there's a big conversation of like what we inherit in terms of trauma.
mm,
Obviously, the second part of Ashley Johnson's voice ringing is that this trauma, as we explored, is is as we explored in the podcast, but as is explored in the show. Ellie and the guitar become a conduit for these like windows into that sadness throughout the
yeah.
rest of the show. And when we'll talk about it, but when she performs "Take on Me," we witness that, and Ashley Johnson performing that as Ellie in the game has become so iconic that it is
Mm,
now like a very celebrated cover of the song, even for people who aren't fans of the game because it's just so well listened to.
mhm.
So I think that for two reasons we're hearing Ashley Johnson's voice, and I think it's really really beautiful.
Yeah,
She also
always.
just has like a good voice for it.
Right, like genuinely
Yeah,
just a great singer.
yeah,
Yeah, so no, it was a very fitting ending for everything that we've just seen in this episode. And yeah, even just like the innocence of the quality of her vocal when she's singing that is so lovely. Just, oh, honestly, check out that cover if you haven't. But yeah, Joey, like this episode for me is a 10 out of 10. Like
Mm,
genuinely, this for me was just, it gave me everything. And it's so interesting because like a lot of the Jackson stuff was kind of new. Like we don't see Tommy fight a bloater, like and stuff like that. But it just made sense for me. I loved it. I love this kind of like the chaos is going on over here, and the micro kind of moment that's happening over here is still really important, and almost in many ways, some would argue more important than what's happening over here. But I just think it worked really well. I
yeah.
loved this episode. It gave, as you said, Game of Thrones boots the house down, absolutely. But yes, I just think it delivered exactly what it needed to for that pivotal moment in the second game.
Yeah, I think it was gorgeous. I think I'll confidently give it a 9 out of 10. I saved the 1 point just because there were certain moments in the episode that felt a little, maybe a little awkward to me, and just
Hmm.
because of the adapting it into a different format. And I don't know if that was just my perception receiving it. But even like one of the things that stood out to me was like the bloater chasing Tommy. It just felt a little far fetched that the
Hmm.
bloater would just like die in the last second. That felt like slightly cliche and corny to me. I didn't
Uh-huh.
love that. And honestly, I know it's a small detail, but like I do think the basement imagery was important and is important. And so like even that doesn't make it a perfect score for me. But
Mhm.
I mean, it's a gorgeous episode. I'm like being so nitpicky.
No, no, it's fair. It's fair as well. We can be nitpicky because we know the level of detail that we expect from this show and that it often delivers on. So when there are little moments when it feels a little bit looked over or that they
Yeah.
lacked just a little bit, it's fine to point it out because this is
Yeah.
a show that delivers on detail. You and I have already talked about like keep an eye out for dinosaurs. Like even in that scene when like Abby kills Joel, there is a freaking dinosaur in the background, right? There's like little moments like that. So like the level of detail that they have in this whole show is fascinating. So it's absolutely fine to pull them on that and don't ever apologize for that. Totally fine. I love that. But all right. So that for me was like it was a moment and I'm pleased it delivered and it landed with me and it still sits with me now. And that's exactly what it needed to do.